You'd think that when a man ends up in a bad relationship, it's because he chose the wrong woman. But that's not the full story. The truth is far quieter and far deeper. A woman's only real competition is her relationship with herself, his ability to sit in his silence, or his inability to sit with it, his comfort with his own company, or his fear of it. If his solitude feels like torture, he'll tolerate almost anything, even disrespect, emotional chaos, or control just to avoid being alone. But if his solitude feels nourishing, peaceful, and enough, then he won't trade it for a relationship that feels worse than being alone. This is why some men repeatedly enter bad relationships, not because of the women they meet, but because of what they're trying to escape inside themselves. If you've ever felt this tension between bad company and empty rooms, drop a comment. I know the weight of my silence and what it protects. 1. He feels safer, distracted than alone. Many older men who end up in bad relationships didn't wake up one day intending to be mistreated, but something inside them felt too heavy, too loud, too uncomfortable to face alone. For these men, solitude isn't peaceful. It's punishing. The silence of an empty home doesn't soothe them. It confronts them. In that silence, their insecurities get louder. Their old regrets replay. Their doubts echo. So even a noisy, disrespectful relationship feels like relief. Because it's noise, they can manage a distraction from the noise inside their mind. That's why they stay. Not because they're blind, but because they're afraid of what happens when they sit alone with their thoughts. They fill the space. Any relationship feels better than no relationship, even if it drains them. It's not love they crave, it's escape. But here's the truth. If a man can't sit comfortably in his own company, if he hasn't made peace with his solitude, he will mistake any relationship, even a bad one, as a refuge. Until he learns that real peace starts inside, he will keep choosing distraction over healing. 2. His self-worth is tied to being needed. Some men equate usefulness with worthiness. If they feel needed to fix things, to provide, to rescue, they feel valuable. A bad relationship often provides endless problems to solve, endless fires to put out, endless chances to be important. It may exhaust him, but it gives him a role. Even if she's disrespectful, critical, draining, he feels relevant as long as he's doing something for her. So he stays not out of love, but out of the illusion of purpose. He thinks, if she needs me, then maybe I'm worth something. But what he doesn't realize is this. His worth has nothing to do with being needed. It has everything to do with being whole. The man who ties his value to his usefulness becomes a slave to external demands. He's forever measuring himself by how much he gives, even when no one gives back. But when a man matures, truly matures, he learns that his dignity isn't found in fixing, it's found in being present, being peaceful, being whole, without needing to be needed. 3. He mistakes emotional chows for emotional depth. For some men, calm love feels foreign. They grew up in homes where affection came with conditions, where love was loud, unpredictable, sometimes even painful. So when they encounter emotional chaos, arguments, tension, dramatic reconciliations, it feels familiar. Familiarity feels like comfort, even when it isn't. They mistake intensity for intimacy. The raised voices, the slammed doors, the silent treatments followed by tearful apologies, it all feels real to them. But real love isn't chaotic. Real love is calm. This is why some men confuse drama with passion. They think, if it's this intense, it must be meaningful. But intensity isn't meaning, and chaos isn't connection. In fact, when a man grows wiser, when he begins to heal, he realizes that true love is predictable. It's steady. It's safe. It doesn't require decoding moods. It doesn't exhaust your nervous system. It doesn't keep you guessing. And once a man truly understands this, he no longer entertains the kind of relationship that feels like an emotional roller coaster, because he's learned that peace, not passion, is the real proof of love. 4. He believes loneliness is worse than disrespect. Some men would rather sit at a tense dinner table than sit alone at a peaceful one. Not because they enjoy criticism or cold shoulders, but because to them, loneliness feels like failure. They grew up hearing phrases like, a real man has a wife. A real man provides for a family. A man without a partner must have something wrong with him. So even when the relationship becomes heavy, cold, draining, they stay. They endure tension just to avoid that label, alone. The irony is that many of these men have never truly experienced healthy solitude. They only know loneliness, not solitude. And they confuse the two. Loneliness feels like emptiness. Solitude feels like fullness on your own terms. But if a man hasn't learned that distinction, he will endure almost anything: disrespect, control, criticism, just so he doesn't have to face an empty chair across the table. He's not staying because he loves her. He's staying because the alternative feels like social failure, even if that alternative might offer him peace. When a man matures emotionally, he realizes that sitting alone at a peaceful table is far better than sharing it with resentment, and at that point, loneliness loses its power over him. 5. He's addicted to approval. If a man hasn't made peace with himself, he will seek validation from the people closest to him, often from his partner. And a bad relationship is a perfect environment for this addiction. It gives him endless hoops to jump through. If I can just make her happy, maybe I'm worth something. If I can just do a little more, maybe she'll love me better. But that approval is always temporary. It's conditional, unpredictable, and expensive. It costs him his energy. It costs him his dignity. And eventually, it costs him his peace. When he doesn't get that approval, he works harder. When he gets it, he becomes addicted to keeping it. And that cycle wears him down quietly. He forgets that his worth was never meant to be judged by someone else's moods. That peace can't be earned from another. It has to be claimed from within. A mature man eventually recognizes that seeking constant approval isn't love, it's self-abandonment. And when he truly understands this, he stops dancing for applause that doesn't matter. He chooses peace over praise. 6. He's afraid to lead. A healthy relationship asks a man to stand firm, to lead gently but clearly, to know who he is, and to bring structure without control. But some men avoid that responsibility, not because they don't know how to lead, but because leadership demands presence, courage, and consistency. And that feels heavy, especially for a man who has failed before, or who doubts his own authority. So they choose comfort. They let their partner dictate the terms, even if it means walking on eggshells. They avoid setting boundaries, avoid saying no, avoid claiming their own space. To these men, surrendering leadership feels easier than stepping up and potentially disappointing someone, or disappointing themselves. But this surrender comes at a cost. Without leadership, even quiet, steady, healthy leadership, a relationship drifts. Resentment grows, boundaries blur, and what once felt like love starts to feel like obligation. A man who is afraid to lead eventually feels invisible in his own life. The paradox is this: when a man leads from his true self, calm, honest, steady, he creates peace. Not just for himself, but for his relationship. But when he avoids leadership altogether, he invites chaos quietly, but inevitably. True leadership isn't about dominance. It's about clarity. And for many mature men, it's the clarity they've been missing all along. 7. He settles because he doubts his options. At a certain age, many men begin to doubt their options. They look around and think, this is as good as it gets. Especially after a divorce or heartbreak, the dating landscape can feel foreign, uncomfortable, almost hostile. They see filtered profiles, superficial conversations, and modern dating games they don't want to play. So when a woman shows interest, even if she's not compatible, even if the relationship feels off, they tell themselves, at least I have someone. It's not love that keeps them there. It's fear. Fear that no one else will come along. Fear that being older makes them invisible. Fear that solitude means rejection. But this mindset leads to quiet suffering. They settle, and then convince themselves to stay settled. They shrink their standards to match their fear, not their truth. Yet the truth is this: quality partners are rare at any age, but they exist. And men who respect themselves attract respect. A man who honors his peace, his growth, his boundaries, will never lack meaningful company. Settling doesn't prevent loneliness. It creates resentment. When a man stops doubting his own worth, he naturally stops doubting his options, and he walks away from anything and anyone that doesn't match the life he's carefully built. 8. He's trying to prove he's not The problem. After a painful breakup or divorce, some men carry guilt they don't speak of. They wonder, was it me? Could I have done more? Am I unlovable? Instead of sitting with these questions, they rush into a new relationship. Not to heal, but to prove something. They think, if someone else wants me, maybe I wasn't the problem. If she loves me, maybe I'm still worth something. But this approach blinds them. They ignore red flags, overlook incompatibility, dismiss their own discomfort, just to feel accepted again. They're not choosing love. They're choosing validation. And bad relationships thrive on this need. Partners who manipulate, criticize, or drain him can easily keep a man trapped when he's trying to prove he's good enough. But here's what mature men eventually learn. You don't heal by being chosen again. You heal by choosing yourself fully, calmly, unapologetically. A man who is whole, who forgives himself, who accepts that he's imperfect but worthy, no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. He doesn't rush into relationships for redemption. He waits patiently, peacefully, until what comes matches his healed self. 9. He underestimates the cost of staying. Many men calculate the cost of leaving. The awkward conversations, the loneliness, the societal judgment, the financial impact. But few men calculate the true cost of staying. The cost of lost peace. The cost of drained energy. The cost of waking up every day feeling unseen, unheard, unvalued. This hidden price doesn't show up on a bank statement, but it slowly erodes a man's spirit. It tolerates criticism. He walks on eggshells. He smiles at gatherings while quietly shrinking inside. He thinks, better this than being alone. But one day, the price becomes clear. He realizes that the energy he spends enduring could have been invested in building peace, that the dignity he sacrifices to avoid conflict costs him his self-respect, that every quiet resentment he swallows feeds bitterness he can't hide. A wise man eventually recognizes that leaving isn't always the hardest path. Sometimes, staying costs more. He begins to ask, what am I paying just to avoid being alone? And when he answers that question honestly, he often chooses freedom over familiarity. 10. He hasn't built a life he loves without a woman. The happiest single men over 50 aren't lonely. They're independent. There's a difference, and a profound one. They wake when they want. They know their rhythms. They tend their hobbies, care for their health, nurture friendships that matter. Their lives have purpose with or without a partner. But not every man reaches this point. Some men never learned how to build a fulfilling solo life. Their entire adult identity revolved around relationships, caregiving, partnership. When that relationship ends, whether by divorce, betrayal, or loss, they don't just lose a partner. They lose their blueprint for living. Suddenly, weekends feel empty, dinners feel cold, silence feels threatening. So what do? They cling. They rush into a new relationship, any relationship to fill the void. Not because they want drama, but because they don't yet know how to create a joyful, meaningful life alone. And when a man doesn't know how to build that life, he becomes vulnerable to relationships that drain him, disrespect him, diminish him. A wise man eventually realizes this. The work isn't to find someone better. The work is to become someone better. Alone. To build routines that nourish him, to cultivate hobbies that matter, to build friendships that sustain. When he builds a life he loves, truly loves, he stops needing companionship for validation and starts requiring companionship that adds real value. That's when his standards rise quietly, naturally, and irrevocably. Her only competition was never another woman. It was his ability to sit with himself, or his inability to. A man who is at peace with his own company will walk away from disrespect easily, but a man who fears being alone will tolerate almost anything. So when you see a man trapped in a bad relationship, understand this quiet truth. It's not simply about who he's with. It's about what he hasn't resolved within. No, this isn't about blaming him. It's about seeing clearly. Because once a man begins to love his solitude, once he begins to enjoy the life he builds by himself, his entire standard for love rises. He no longer fears empty rooms. He no longer chases attention. He no longer accepts disrespect, disguised as companionship. He values peace deeply. And unless love comes wrapped in respect, gentleness, and shared purpose, he will walk away, quietly, and never look back. So if you're a man on this journey, if you're rebuilding, recovering, rediscovering yourself after decades of giving, know this: you're not behind. You're becoming. You're not lonely. You're discerning. And one day, whether love finds you again or not, you will know peace as your closest companion. If this speaks to you, if you've started this journey into yourself, comment quietly below. The man I'm becoming protects my peace first. Your comment might just remind another man that being alone isn't failure. It's freedom refined.